from the crypt.
Ryan from the Black Girl Nerds. Today we are
Hello.
Today we are interviewing director, producer, writer Darin Scott. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We can get right into this because we got a lot to talk about.
Sure.
Let's start from the beginning. What's the first movie you remember seeing?
Wow. The first movie that I remember.
Like in your first theater memory.
Well, my first memory actually, my first vivid memory of seeing a movie was when my parents loaded us all up in the station wagon and went to the drive-in. And I think I was 7, maybe. My sister was 5. And my parents went to see Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Oh,
Which
nice.
was the most boring thing conceivable. For little kids, it was torture. So we played in the back, got yelled at a little, and fell asleep. But that's my first memory. Now, when I started going to the theater by myself, was probably when I was 10 years old. And I remember in Inglewood, where I grew up most of the years, there were 2 theaters on Manchester Boulevard, the Academy Theater, which showed the studio movies, and the Fifth Avenue Theater, which showed a lot of the independent. For example, here's a good example of it. Sounder would play at the Academy. Blackula would play at the Fifth Avenue. And so I started going to see movies at those theaters. And I remember seeing Genius Wears Tennis Shoes, what's the name of the Kurt Russell film? Seeing Sounder. Seeing Red Sun, that had Charles Bronson in it. I was probably a teen before I started really getting heavily into movies, but I was always writing. I started in grade school writing stories.
And what kind of stories were you writing?
Generally science fiction.
And before we start recording, you mentioned that you're a fan of the Universal monsters.
Absolutely. Huge fan of Universal and Hammer.
And Hammer, nice.
Yeah, big fan of British horror, period.
Did you watch the Amicus Tales from the Crypt movies?
Those were the movies that got me into horror anthologies. Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, From Beyond the Grave, Asylum. I could go on. Of course, Dead of Night, which started the whole thing in the 40s, and was a British horror movie. So a lot of people from my generation go, "Oh, you love horror anthologies. You're really into Creep Show and the 80s ones." Right. They were fine. I liked them. Creep Show was fine, but it was no Tales from the Crypt as far as I was concerned.
Yeah,
so I definitely love the British Port Meows, they would call them, but anthologies.
And then how did you get into filmmaking?
I went to USC, and I got a bachelor's of science there in chemical engineering, actually. I loved movies. I was a movie nut, went all the time, but I didn't see it as something that you could make a living doing. So I was doing creative writing, taking creative writing courses on the side. And I thought I'll write short stories because I really loved sci-fi short stories. Huge fan of Harlan Ellison.
Mhm.
And I had two idols growing up, two people who I looked up to as a kid. And those were Muhammad Ali and Rod Serling.
There you go.
Those two were like deities to me. And when I got to college, I even painted one wall of my dorm room black and then painted the stars on it and then wrote The Zone,
Hmm.
because I was such a Twilight Zone fanatic. I still am. But you asked me how I got into the business. I really stumbled into it. Because even though I'm from Los Angeles area, I knew nobody in the movies. Inglewood was as far from Hollywood as someplace in Texas, in terms of our connection to it. We had one celebrity who lived in Inglewood who moved in, and that was Whitman Mayo, who was Grady on Sanford. So that was the only one. So at SC, though, I made friends with guys in the film school because they were creative, and I just had more interesting conversations with them. Plus, we would talk movies. And after I got out of SC, I went to work for Procter and Gamble as a project manager at a paper plant in Oxnard.
Hmm.
And I hated corporate with a purple passion. So I got this idea. I said, well, the thing I love is movies, love them to death. So how could I be involved with movies all the time? So I got this idea. This is the early days of video stores, video rental stores. This was before Blockbuster or anything. All of the video rental stores were independent. And I actually went to work at one of them in the evenings for free. I said, I just want to work here and learn the business because my dream job is watching movies all day and talking about movies all day with people who come in and random movies. I'd be involved with movies all the time. That didn't really work out. But I ended up breaking up with a girlfriend who I was engaged to at the time, and I needed some place to live because I was staying with her, and I ended up moving in with a buddy of mine who was a filmmaker, Jeff Burr, and who I did my first 2 movies with. And once I moved in with him, everybody who was coming into the house was all about movies and about getting into the business and how we're going to get a film made and all this. And I fell in love with it. And I said, I've been writing these short stories, but they don't pay any money. You can't make a living at that. And my buddy Jeff said, why don't you try writing screenplays? They pay for those. I said, okay. And push come to shove, I ended up leaving my job at Procter and Gamble. I was 24 at the time. So, and that's the point in your time in your life, the period in your life when you should take chances and try to find what you want to do is in your early, mid, even late 20s, because it's harder later, much harder to go through those. I went from making a really good salary because chemical engineers came out of school making just about the highest salaries of anyone with a BS degree, to making no money and living where we all moved into this house in Tahunga and worked on our dream of getting a movie going. And eventually we raised $255,000 to make From a Whisper to a Scream, which was my first film as a writer-producer and was, what, a horror anthology.
Man, it's
So,
just so interesting to hear you talk about like just the start and the hustle of not being afraid to be like, okay, this is my dream that I want to follow. And I'm so curious about like the conversations, starting out, all these filmmakers in the house, what you guys were talking about to just even, begin to know where you wanted to go with your dream. Like, how do you write a screenplay? Because, you're not Google at the time. So how are you like, taking the chances of like learning all the techniques and everything?
sure. I just read some of them and started writing. It was easier to start out on a horror anthology because they're shorter stories. You can write a 20, 25-minute story, and as opposed to writing an entire script that's more complicated and took me longer to get good at than doing the short stories. But yeah, it was a risk taking the chance. And in fact, if I'd known everything that I should have known, I probably wouldn't have done it. Because my bud told me that he had some money in a trust. And this is Jeff Burr. And he says, well, I've got this money. I got $40,000, which in the early 80s was a decent little amount of money. You could make something on video for that. And so it's like, look, we're going to try to raise more money, but we've got this money here. So if we can't raise the money, then we'll make a movie on video with the money from my trust. And that gave me a little bit more nerve to do it. It's like, we're not going to come out here and just not do anything. So I quit my job. And later I found out that he couldn't access that money for like another 20 years.
Oh.
I don't know. I don't think he realized it at the time either. So it was a big risk, because if we hadn't been able to raise the money, we'd kind of been screwed. But luckily, we actually were able to raise the $255,000.
And that was for From Whisper to a Scream.
Yes.
I mean, getting Vincent Price in your first movie that you hustled for is pretty good get.
Yeah, and there's a good story behind that. We wanted Vincent Price in the movie desperately, and as we were trying to raise the money, we told the potential investors, we're going to have Vincent Price in. They recognized his name, obviously. So in order to approach him, there was a service in Los Angeles at that time. You couldn't do this now. People would get totally sued. But for $10, they would sell you the address of any celebrity.
What?
You could get $10.
Is that like the Star Maps?
It wasn't called Star Maps. I forget the name.
Yeah.
They're long gone, obviously.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, yeah, I mean, the modern equivalent is getting an IMDb account and looking at people's agents, which is
Yeah. But we actually went to the man's house.
wow.
Lived on a street above Sunset Boulevard. Beautiful neighborhood. So we drive to the street. We got the address, and we park across the street, and we stare at the house. And then we start arguing about who's going to go up there, because we're terrified.
Oh.
We're terrified to go and knock. What if it's not even the right address? What if somebody comes to the door and, so we're like, we're arguing about this. We're gnawing our arms off. And the mailman comes. The mailman comes, and watch the mailman come, knock on the door, and Vincent Price opens the door and gets his mail. And now we're like, okay, we know he's home, and we know he's answering the door. We cannot punk out now. So we got our nerve up and marched up to the door, knocked. We had a copy of the script, which was bound in red, I remember. And he opens the door, and he could not have been more gracious. He could have not have been more nice. He invited us in. He served us iced tea. He showed us his art collection. He introduced us to his wife.
Wow.
Said he would
Wow.
read the script.
Wait, so and what year was this? This was had to been mid 80s,
84.
84. And I just picture him coming out with like a big smoking jacket, and
I don't even remember what he was wearing.
that's amazing. And who was with you at the time? So it was Jeff Burr.
Jeff Burr, yes, the pride director. So we did that, and he said, "I'll read it." So in the meantime, we got a guy who was an heir to a carpet company in Dalton, Georgia. We shot From Whisper to a Scream in Dalton, Georgia, which is a town about 90 miles north of Atlanta. And at the time, and actually still, it was the carpet capital of the world. 65% of the world's carpet was made in Dalton, Georgia.
Wow.
And there were all of these carpet mills, huge mills. And they were almost all family owned, and private companies. So you knew who the rich people in town were. And by the way, Jeff was from Dalton. That's why we went there. And you knew who the rich people in town were. They owned the carpet mills. So we hit up all those people, or at least my partner, Bill Burr, Jeff's brother, hit them up, because I couldn't go to Dalton, Georgia in 1984 to raise money.
Yeah.
I put together all the materials for the fundraising, the legal papers, the presentation, everything. But I gave that to Bill. I said, "Bill, raise the money, and if you succeed, then I'll show up." Because situation there. To really clarify it for you, do you know who Dalton, Georgia's Congress person is now in the House of Representatives?
It's not who I think it is it?
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh God.
So you know about Dalton. I spent 3 months there in 1984 and somehow came home. My mom was real worried about it. But I didn't know really how Dalton was at the time. But anyway, we raised the money. And as we're getting ready to go there, and I was a writer, but I was made also producer, because I had done $3 or $4 million worth of capital improvement projects that I was in charge of when I was working at Procter & Gamble. So I'm the only one who had handled any amount of money. So they're like, "Okay, so you be the producer." So that's how I ended up being a producer. And we raised the money. Then Vincent Price graciously said, "No, I don't want to be in this." We said, "Well, let's shoot all the parts of the movie that he's not in. And then when we get back, we'll try to get somebody, we'll try him again, and we'll try to get somebody of similar stature to be in it. Maybe we can get Christopher Lee or something like that." We're thinking. And so we went, we shot the whole movie. And then we edited it together, and then got in contact with Vincent Price again and got him to screen the episodes. He told us no again. But then we went back to his agent a little later and I said, "Look, we'll give him $10,000 for 2 days," which was a lot back then. And finally he said, "Okay, I'll do it." And we shot his portion of it at the old Hammond Lumber Yard, which was Roger Corman's studio in Santa Monica, in the early, really up through the early 90s before he gave it up.
Wow, you should make a movie about this experience because it's almost like
Seriously, I want to
There's
see
a
this
lot
film.
to it.
it's almost like Rudy in a way. In a way, like
I wish you guys could have seen the look on the faces of the people who'd given us the money when I showed up in Dalton.
Oh boy.
They're
Mhm.
like,
yeah, this is a story worth making a movie of. With
Yeah,
it's like
seriously.
it's
Yeah.
Finding Vincent. There you go. That's your title.
I had some experiences there where I had to swallow some pride in order to keep the project
Ugh.
going. Let's put it this way. Things
Yeah, I
were said
bet. Jeez.
that I had to ignore.
Yeah.
But, you know, I want to get into the film business.
Mhm.
And you had to take
Ryan?
a bit more guff than you do today. Obviously, it's been a drastic change. When I first came in, I didn't know of any other Black producers.
Mhm.
Mid 80s. I'm sure actually there were some. You had guys like Michael Schultz making movies, but it wasn't much. After the end of the 70s blaxploitation era, and before Spike Lee came on the scene, really, he kind of restarted the engine.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, there was a soldier story. There was a soldier story. And there was a soldier story. There really wasn't many films made with Black casts during that time period. It was just like dead. So, you know, I was like, well, let's do horror, you know, and it was my idea to do a horror anthology because I thought that was the most producible thing
Mhm.
and the most commercial thing for a beginning group of filmmakers.
So how does Rusty fit into the scenario? Because you gotta have, you talking about an all Black cast. I feel like one of the best things you do, one of the coolest things you can do is have a genius producer like yourself and also have a Black director to
Yeah.
really get it, like make sure the culture is represented. So this is a story I need to know.
Well, Rusty and I were hooked up by a mutual friend who grew up with him in Pittsburgh or near Pittsburgh. The funny thing is, Rusty and I were at USC at the same time, but we didn't really know each other.
Wow.
I might have met him once the whole 4 years I was there. But and this would be the late 80s, 88, 89, when he and I hooked up and we became fast friends, and we decided to try to make movies together. And we had our first project. It was called The Other Class, that we shot basically a trailer for. And The Other Class was an ensemble Black romantic comedy. Everybody in town told us Black people won't go see romantic comedies. They would never go see something like that. They'll only see hood movies and gangster movies. So it was some years before that changed. Of course, in the early aughts, as everybody was copying Tyler Perry, that's the only kind of Black film you could get made. So it went from you can only make hood movies to you can only make the middle class romantic comedies. But anyway, Rusty and I worked on that. That didn't work out. And we had a mutual love for a movie. This is Spinal Tap. It was one of my favorite comedies and still is.
Right.
And we had the idea. Both of us will probably say it was his idea. Because we do that with Tales from the Hood. We're both like, no, man, that was yeah. But we came up with this concept, Fear of a Black Hat. And Fear of a Black Hat is basically a rap version of Spinal Tap comedy. And we made a little promo trailer for that, which was turned down by everybody in town. and we were despairing a little bit. And then one of the people who had seen the little trailer we made, went to another company, ITC. And I had already made a movie for ITC, which was Stepfather 2. And so we knew the people there. And this new executive went over there and showed Chris Gorog, who was the head of ITC at that time. And he loved it. And he gave us $1 million to do Fear of a Black Hat. And that was our first movie together. Then, of course, I did Menace to Society and Love in a 45, and got the idea on Love in a 45 to do a Black horror anthology. And Rusty, who was always heavily into social causes, he said, hey, you know, we should make these stories socially conscious. And there was certainly a lot going on at the time.
Yep.
A lot going on at the time. The LA riots had taken place, the Rodney King thing, also. There was lots of material to work off of to do the stories. Now, the only sad thing about it, we really enjoyed making the movie. And it's still one of my favorite experiences and one of my favorite things that I've ever done. The only sad thing is that the stories in Tales from the Hood work just as well now as they did then, because we still have the same problems.
Right.
And you know, but given it's made it stand the test of time for a lot of people, but I wish some of these issues had improved more than they have since we made it.
Yeah, we on my podcast we invited the Black Girl Nerds to come on and do a review because we're reviewing different anthologies, and I hadn't seen it in a long time. And again, your perspective changes as you get older.
Absolutely.
And I saw, you know, as like in my teens or 20s, and I remember the horror bits, the zombie and the dolls and everything, but seeing it now much older with a lot more perspective, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like,
Yeah.
The horror I'm used to wasn't scary anymore. It was the other horror that was the scary part. And like you said, it's still here.
That was always the idea. Human beings are scarier than any monsters. Yeah.
So stepping back for a minute, were you influenced by like Tales from the Crypt, the TV show, or did that help you get the movie made because that was so popular at the time, and the name Tales from the Crypt, you know, that moniker was kind of back in the subconscious?
Yeah. I'm sure it probably helped us get it financed. I'm sure that nobody at the financing company ever mentioned Tales from the Crypt, but Tales from the I'm sure it helped us. On the other hand, no, I actually never watched the Tales from the Crypt TV series.
Oh, okay. So
I did watch. I mean, I loved, as I said, the British ones.
The British one, yeah.
I did like, Creep Show. I liked Creep Show. I liked the lower budget. What was the lower budget one that?
Tales from the Dark Side.
Tales from the Dark Side. Yeah. Tales from the Dark Side. That was fun because it was obviously done on a micro budget,
right?
And yet they were still able to tell some pretty good stories and get 2 features out of it. Yeah.
Was Rusty a horror fan as well?
Not so much. You know, he likes horror, but he wasn't like a in the horror crowd and
right.
A horror guy like me.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's one thing that's very apparent when watching this movie as a horror fan is that these people know and love horror.
yes,
Um,
yes.
what?
And he's gotten into it much more
Mhm,
in the ensuing years.
yeah. Were
Yeah.
there specific movies that you wanted to pull from and reference as you were writing the script?
Hmm. Just the general love of horror anthologies.
Hmm.
And I'd seen so many and liked them so much. I
Like, were
don't.
you like, I want the zombie from this movie? That's what I'm thinking of for this, the first segment, and this and that.
Well, there were some Twilight Zone things
Okay.
that we put in it, and some of them got cut.
Oh,
Are you a fan of the Twilight Zone?
I am.
And
I am.
yeah, I haven't watched them in a long time, but yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a Twilight Zone episode where Lee Marvin goes to the grave of a gunslinger who he had a beef with. And that gunslinger, before he died, had said, if this guy ever comes anywhere near my grave, I'm going to reach up and grab him. And so all the people in the bar that night bet Lee Marvin that he won't do it. And he's like, you guys all know I'm brave. I've hunted down outlaws, I've done all this. Why do you think I'll be afraid? And they're like, because we'd be afraid. They go up there, this guy's grave at midnight. So Lee Marvin goes to the grave. And what he has to do is plunge a knife into the dirt of the grave. And then they're all going to come in the morning. Then they're going to see that he did it. And then he's going to be paid off bets because he's bet everybody in the bar. And they go up there and Lee Marvin goes up. He plunges the knife into the grave. He's terrified, of course. Nothing happens. So now he's feeling pretty good about himself. And he raises the knife and puts it in again. And he gets up to go, and we just see him go, yanked down out of frame. And it's like, oh my God. So they come the next morning and they find his body next to the grave.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, we killed the man. The ghost killed him. And Lee Van Cleef, you know who Lee Van Cleef is?
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes. Lee Van Cleef, who's in the episode, says it's obvious what happened. He had put the knife through his long coat. He said, so pinning his coat to the grave. He said, when he went to get up, it jerked him. He said, and in his own mind, the outlaw had reached up and grabbed him. He was already scared half to death. His heart gave out. And that's the story. And then the gunslinger's sister, who has also major beef with Lee Marvin, says, you think that's how it happened? You think that's how it happened, huh? Which way is the wind blowing? Same as it was last night, east. And she stands next to the grave and she's got this big coat on. And the wind is coming from the same direction it was that night. And she puts the coat out and the wind is blowing the coat away from the grave very hard. So how did it get over that? And she laughs, and her demented laugh ends the thing. Now, why did I tell you this whole story? Well, two reasons. One, I love telling Twilight Zone stories, so you can always get into them. But two, the original ending of the doll episode was the dolls are chasing them around the house. Then somebody comes there the next day and they find him hung. And he's hanging and his feet are like 4 feet off the ground. And they're like, oh, he hung himself. And Art Evans who was in the episode, points out that all the tables and chairs are in the corners of the room. There's nothing for him to step on top of. So how did he hang himself? And that was supposed to be the eerie end. Well, studio saw it and said, not enough punch to that. We'll give you some more money to have the dolls come back and just slaughter them. And that's when we went back to shop. And that's what's in the movie now. So I think that was the biggest influence on a story, and it didn't even make it into the final movie.
That's interesting, because that would have made a very creepy ending, but the other one's a bit more satisfying.
Yes, it is more satisfying.
Because you really want to see him get it.
And we didn't argue with him. With him, we're like, you give us $100,000 more, that we'll do it. You know?
I mean, you want to get more Cheeto Brother effects? Go for it.
Yes, loved working with them. Loved doing stop motion, which is obviously fallen way out of favor in the age of CGI.
Have you seen Mad God?
No.
It's Phil Tippett, who's a master of stop motion animation, has been working on the film for 20 years, and maybe 30 years. And it finally came out last year. It's all stop motion.
Oh, great.
Wow.
It's like an hour and a half fever dream. It's bizarre. But
I have to check that out.
It's on Shudder if you have it.
Okay, yeah, definitely have Shudder. I got Shudder.
Okay.
I've got all.
There you
go. Kino Cult. I got that too.
Nice.
I wanted to say, kind of sticking with that scene of, having that payback as soon as we open up Tales from the Hood, with the character of Martin, and you realizing like, hey, even today, that stuff hasn't changed. We're talking about police brutality.
Right.
And I remember I'm 32. I hadn't seen it when it first came out. And I'm not, I get scared easily. So it took me a minute to get to it.
Sure.
So I got to it and I was like, I opened up with this scene and I was immediately pissed, knowing, the Black experience in America, you already know you're going to have that effect. Right. But I'm curious, not like you have to reach too far, but I'm curious between you and Rusty, what personal conversations or stories, I'm like picturing you guys sitting around the table saying, okay, we have this horror genre that we're playing with, but how can we put our everyday life in this as well? Like what Black people are going through in the 90s. How do we show that, where we can still have that horror element that's going to pull a certain audience in, but there's a point to this.
Yes. And that's pretty much it. Sitting around in his apartment, brainstorming, and on the phone, brainstorming. And we brainstormed all 4 stories together. And then we split them to script. Mm-hmm. And I scripted the first episode and the last episode. And he scripted the 2 in the middle. They could have been rearranged or whatever. It really didn't matter. As I said, we both contributed to the stories of all the episodes. But we just split them up for scripting purposes. And we had a draft. We sent it to Spike. Rusty had been in school days. So he had a number to contact Spike with. And we sent the script to Spike. And at that time, if you remember, in the early mid-90s, Spike was very active, not only doing his own movies, but producing movies. And he did quite a few, and he loved the script. And he's the one that got us the money. First, he took it to Universal. They considered it, but passed. He had been working with Universal. That's why he did that. And then there was this new company, Savoy, which only existed 6 or 7 years. But they liked it, and they gave us $6 million to do it, which was huge to us at that point, because we'd never done anything for more than 3 at that point. So it was a lot of fun. You could shoot a movie non-union for $6 million in Los Angeles, all over Los Angeles at that time. It would be impossible now. The movie would probably cost $20-25 million to try to do now in LA. We built all the sets, all the interiors were sets in a giant, it was a big warehouse in downtown Los Angeles that had 2 floors. So we had sets on the bottom floor and the upper floor, and just filled the place with these huge sets. I've never been able to have that many sets again. I sure would love to. I love shooting on stage. You can control things more, you know.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like moving all around. Like he had the paintings in the one scene,
Yeah.
you know, like the little like doll feet and stuff. Like I'm just imagining people like just working it through in this set, which like you said, you can't do right now. Like you add in a lot of special effects, but all that stuff is like, you can work with set. Yeah.
Had a little bit of computer stuff, but we couldn't really afford that much because digital effects at that time were done on these silicon graphics workstations that cost $100,000 a piece. And so you went to a company to do your effects. It was expensive and it was time consuming.
Yeah.
So you did as much as you could physically. And, you know, we always had the philosophy, I still do to this day, that when you combine physical effects and then enhance them with CGI, that's when you get the best result. When it's all CGI, it seems phony and I don't like it. And I still, to this day, want to go back in, because we ran out of money at the end, go back in and fix that tongue.
Yeah.
Again. After he says, "Welcome to hell."
Yeah, there's something endearing about that. There's something endearing, like as a time capsule, about that level of effect, but it's also really cringe at the same time.
That was a bad effect.
Yeah.
Looks like a cartoon. It drives me crazy. I'm always like, you know what? I'm gonna take. I have friends in CGI. I ought to rip a 4K of this, take it to them, and say, just fix that. So I just have that. I just have that version with the fixed tongue. You know.
Well, and then you have that great merge though from Clarence Williams himself into the makeup version, that was with Screaming Mad George. That's really good. That's really impressive.
Mad George is crazy. Loved him. Loved him. You know, he did the twisted David Allen Greer body that twists all around, and this shit ain't over, bitch. Remember that?
Oh, fantastic line. Like that, just I love that part so much. It's great. It's great.
So yeah, you know.
Was there anything else that was either changed as originally scripted or in editing that was changed?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. That was the major one. No, there wasn't much else that was changed from the script, and that was because of Spike. Spike was the ultimate executive producer. He didn't bother us the whole time we were making the movie. He said, go guys, you know, make your film. I've got you the money, make it. He didn't interfere with anything. But when we got into post and a new head of the company came in who decided he wanted to completely recut our movie and make it more of a comedy. This guy was an absolute jerk. I will say that. I won't say his name, but I'll say he was an absolute jerk. And so he had like 20 pages of notes on our final cut that was just going to destroy it. And Spike got a copy of the notes. And he just wrote on it, no, and sent it back. And the guy was just
Nice.
beside himself, but we were so happy. So Tales from the Hood is pretty pure. It's pretty pure what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it, for good or bad. If you like it, we're responsible, and if you don't, we're responsible. Can't blame it on the studio.
Do you to kind of get into the characters a little bit, not to say you're responsible for this, but do you know if there's anybody else that was considered for Mr. Sims? Because we know we got Clarence Williams. He did his thing in this. And
Right.
also, can I add on to that? How did the beads of sweat get created?
The beads of sweat?
Yes, were you around for this effect? Did you happen to see this up close?
No. Yeah, when he got sweaty. That's just him. In fact, I'll tell you something. When we first screened the movie for the theater, for the studio, we didn't have the effects in yet. And we showed them the last scene and Clarence going off, and they were like, the effects are great in that. And we're like, there are no effects yet. That's just his performance. They're like, really? So all the sweating, that's Clarence was intense. He was an intense dude. And I'm sure we talked about other people, but I can't even remember them, because I can't imagine anybody else in that role in the movie than Clarence Williams. You know, and we've made a couple of sequels, and we got Keith David, close we could get, and that was a cool thing to have. We got Tony Todd for the last one, but obviously not nearly the budgets that we had back then. And you know, they were cool, but Clarence, for what he did, was transcendent. I mean,
Yes.
one of my favorite performances ever, and definitely one of my favorite performances in movies that I've done.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's one, yeah, it is so over the top. It's just amazing. And I made a supercut of every time someone says the shit.
Yes, yeah, it was great.
I actually sat down in the wraparound. I sat down to edit it all together, and it's 37 times.
That's awesome. I didn't even know how many
Fantastic.
times.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link, but it's
really?
yeah, 37.
Awesome.
I'm including the poopity pop, the doo doo, but yes.
Yeah. That shit too.
Was that scripted, or was that just him ad-libbing?
That he ad-libbed.
Yeah, it's so great.
Oh, that's genius.
But
My
the
favorite.
shit,
That's gotta be like the best line.
Yeah, and I think he added a few the shits, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, he just, man, we really wanted to get him in Tales 2, which he did several years ago, but he was 81 at the time, and was a little ill, and he said he couldn't do it. He wanted to.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I really like about this movie is that the wraparound is so campy, so over the top, but the tales themselves are just so biting. But you have it's kind of like, I always look at the wraparound as like a dessert.
Right.
You know, you have your meat, you have your section, your courses in between, but the wraparound is what kind of gels everything together. And Clarence Williams' performance is just magnetizing.
Yeah, and it's seldom that you see a really good wraparound in good horror anthology movies. My favorite wraparound of all time is in Asylum, which is a British, one of the best British horror anthologies. And it's got a just killer wraparound. Killer.
Yeah.
I would say it's a little better than ours, but I'll put ours second. How about that?
But I mean, I think that's why I always say Tales of the Crypt, the show, works so well because everyone loves the Crypt Keeper. He's just iconic. Everyone loves it. And if the episode itself is subpar, you still have him popping up at the end to kind of bring you back up. So that's why the show works every time.
It's kind of like a horror host.
Yeah, exactly. It's the ultimate
Saturday
horror
show, and it's like, oh, okay, the movie was bad, but I got some jokes to tell about it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Now,
Did you grow
flipping
up
to
where'd you grow up?
me,
You guys didn't grow up in LA, did
I
No,
live in LA
I'm
now, but
you?
I grew up in Oregon.
I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, okay. My father's from North Carolina.
Oh, nice, nice.
So I got a lot of family back there. Okay. Yeah, well, in LA, you know, everybody from wherever they come from has a horror host.
Mhm.
Here, it was a guy named Seymour, Seymour's Monster Rally. And actually, Seymour went on to start the haunted nights at Knott's Berry's Farm. At first, they were called Seymour's Haunt at Knott's Berry's Farm. That's kind of the genesis of amusement park horror in October's. Started with that. So, but he was a guy, he would put on a really bad 50s sci-fi or horror movie, low budget thing. And he would pop up in the corner of the screen and talk shit. Yeah. You know. Yeah. Well, I guess she's sorry she went upstairs that time, isn't she? You know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
pop in and then he'd go away. So a good host is great for horror.
Mhm.
I want to talk about might be the other side of the MVP as far as horrific goes. Is David Allen Greer is just
Oh man,
so
Yes.
terrifying.
Yeah.
let me tell you something. When he came in to read for it, we were like, David Allen Greer, he's hilarious.
Yeah.
Funny
Mhm.
guy. He's on Living Color.
Yep.
This guy is an abuser. He came in and auditioned. We were like, one, call security, and two, you're hired. You know, and I think the episode is much more effective for it being someone who you would never expect
Mhm.
be like that, because you know, much of the time, maybe most of the time, when people hear that someone has killed their spouse or been beating them or doing terrible things, the neighbors are like, he was such a nice guy. He was cool. The people at work, oh, we couldn't imagine that he would do something like that. You know, and he brought that quality to it just from the fact that he was on TV being funny all the time at that exact moment. So he gave a fantastic performance, a really scary performance. And for people who see the movie now, who really aren't that familiar with him, it's just a tremendous dramatic performance. And they might not realize that this guy was a really funny guy, and is still a funny guy. You know?
Right. Was he like trying to get into more dramatic roles? Was he trying to break
I
out
think
of
that's why he
his?
came out for it.
Mhm.
Frankly, I mean, I'm sure he was typecast
Right.
at that time as a funny guy, a harmless guy. So this was a great part for him.
Mhm.
He knocked it out of the park. You know?
Who else was in consideration?
I really don't remember.
Yeah.
Really don't remember.
I mean,
When you find somebody,
mhm. Everyone else fades away.
well, almost 30 years also takes some of your memories out. But when you find somebody that great in a part, you can't imagine or even remember who
Oh, yeah.
else you thought of. It's like he made that part so great. I don't know who we probably would have gotten somebody who usually plays bad guys.
Right.
Play the part, and it would have worked, but it wouldn't have been as good.
Well, and you set him up with like almost a triple fake out because you're building it up as the monster, and you've got those
Right.
like those hands and claws coming out. You're expecting something monstrous.
Right.
Then he comes on, you're like, oh, it's just David Allen Greer. But no, it's a
No.
real life monster.
He's a real life monster. He's someone you really have to be afraid of. instead of
Mm.
just coming from the imagination. And his death is
Yeah.
exquisitely satisfying.
Yes.
Most of the
Mhm.
audience.
Yep. I like the slow reveal on like the monster tattoo on his arm and everything
Yes.
too.
Yeah. There's a little touches, but yeah, he was great to work with. The whole cast, we didn't really have any problems with anybody. It was a fun. And I went on to direct things, and generally the most fun I've had on sets were things that I directed, obviously, because directing's so much fun. But making Tales from the Hood was as or more fun than anything I directed myself. And of course, Rusty was very creatively generous with me in that I was by his side all the time and giving him notes and things. And when he agreed, he did it. When he didn't agree, he didn't. And that's the way it should work with a creative producer and a director. But really working with him on that one and having so much input to it planted the seed in my mind that, maybe I should try directing. It planted the seed because at first I was like, well, I didn't go to film school, so I can't be a director. That's what I thought going in, but I can write and I can produce and all this. And, after years of working with a lot of first-time directors, I decided to become one myself and did that.
Not to steer too much away from the directing, but you kind of hit something where you were talking about notes and you and Rusty kind of bouncing things off of each other
Yeah.
and finding out. I'm curious for writing, what were some of the things you guys kind of picked up, I guess, either learning from each other or just overall in the experience as writers that you guys learned from working on this project, whether it was just being in like the horror genre itself?
I had worked in the horror genre before, but it was just going back and forth. Really, once we scripted the things,
Mhm.
we didn't have a ton of notes for each other because we had worked so hard on the stories. We knew what all the beats were going to be,
Okay.
So not like any other writing experience. But Rusty had written some little short socially conscious horror plays, which he had put on at a theater downtown. So he kind of had that. And I had done a horror anthology and loved horror anthologies. So we kind of put the two things together. And, I'm grateful to him really having that strong idea of let's make this socially relevant. Because I was a horror guy. I'm coming out and I'm like, well, let's come up with stories that are scary and cool as possible. It's like, yeah, you say something too. I'm like, I could say something. Okay, let's do that too.
Yeah, that really what
That's what's made it stand the test of time. Really.
Yeah, that's what makes it special and probably way ahead of its time than it should have been.
Yeah. And it's got a cult following now. At the time we put it out, it didn't really do that well at the box office because the studio marketed it as a straight comedy. And they totally played down the social content. They thought that was box office poison. Come to find out, that's what people liked about it the most.
Yep.
And it had both those qualities, the horror. We did have humor in it, obviously, and it should have been sold in a more balanced way instead of kind of making fun of it. But I don't think the marketing people really understood what they had at that time. And you can hear this complaint, and I'm sure you do hear this same complaint from 90% of the filmmakers you talk to. So that's the way the business goes. When you get great marketing and a good movie, it's a miracle. And those are the hits that you see out there, you know. And so many great films aren't hits. I mean, two of my favorite films of the 80s came out in the same year on the same day. Blade Runner and The Thing.
Yeah.
They came out on the same Friday. They both got critically blasted and they bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're two of the iconic movies of the decade. And people love them. So, yeah. E.T. killed The Thing.
Right.
People are like, oh no, we want our aliens to be sweet now. You know, I like E.T., but scary aliens are generally more commercialist than not being made by Steven Spielberg. He can make a friendly alien and make it work.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of us, we need to make it kind of scary.
But okay, so I guess going back to the fact of, okay, we know marketing comes into big play, right? There's a lot of social, awareness, a lot of things that you guys were trying to bring attention to that maybe were played down because, they wanted to say, hey, this is a straight comedy.
Yeah.
But as far as you guys had a set goal, everybody on set knew what you guys were trying to do as far as a project. So I'm curious at some of these scenes, the late Lamont that played Jerome,
Yeah,
and just fantastic. And I'm just so curious. He had so many intense scenes. The thing that sticks in my mind is being in a cell right next to white supremacists, like those kind of scenes like that.
That's one of the favorite scenes I've ever written.
Yep.
And I told a joke at that particular actor's wake, because unfortunately he passed away. And passed away relatively young. But I talked about my experience of watching that particular scene get shot, because it was a good scene and I was happy with what I put down, but it could be accused of being a little bit on the nose or whatever if you didn't have the right person doing it. And I remember watching the first take of him doing the scene, the guy who played the white supremacist. And I watched that scene and I watched him do it. And I went, I'm a genius. But I wasn't a genius. He was the genius.
Right.
He was a genius. But the first, I'm like, man, I wrote an awesome scene. But then looking back at it later, I'm like, no, he made it awesome. And that's what you really want from an actor, as a director, as a writer, to take the material and elevate it and make it so much better than it is on the page. And when you're working with really great actors, that's what happens. And I always say, even things that I wrote and directed, people ask me, well, what's your favorite line from the movie? And I'll go, well, this line. And they'll go, why? And I was like, he ad-libbed that. And the stuff that's ad-libbed, that's great, is more exciting because you're like, oh, cool, So you love that forever, even though you didn't write it.
So there was nothing weird. So was there anything that felt weird to the actors? So they were like, okay, we got to make this stick with we have a point we're trying to get to. So we're going to go all in on this, no matter what, what happens, what the reaction, we're going to ad lib, we're going to follow the script, but I'm playing this true to what we know in life. Was there any hesitation from anybody?
Well, not hesitation.
Yeah.
The only person who felt a little nervous sometimes and asked us a few times, is that okay? Was Corbin Burnson.
Yeah.
Because he had to play this virulent racist.
Yeah.
And I remember after he says, you nigglins, cut.
Yeah.
Is that okay, guys? You guys cool? We're like, great. Great. Keep saying it just like that. You know, it was in the script. The word was in the script, but he was nervous saying,
Mm.
you know. I have the opposite issue usually. Frankly, when you make a movie that's a crime movie or a horror movie or anything intense with a black cast, there is a tendency, and I never fought it, and now I try to tone it down. But for years, there's a tendency, the actors add the N-word constantly. They're just ad-libbing, and they're talking to each other, and they say it over and over again. Sometimes it's like, okay, can you give us a take without that? Because the studio might have something to say about it. Now, I've done movies back in the day, back in the 90s, they used to make syndication versions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had movies where there were literally hundreds of edits and hundreds of replacements for cursing and for the N-word. And I've never actually sat through any of them. What? 300 changes? Okay, well, you guys do that and sell it to Channel 5, but I'm not watching that. And those versions have all long gone away and vanished now. But you know, I encourage ad-libbing usually. You know, people ask me, especially if I've written a script, they'll ask me, is it okay if I put it in my own words? I always say it's not Shakespeare. You know, if I don't like it, I'll tell you. But otherwise, make it your own, because it's going to be better that way most of the time, especially if you're working with talented performers.
Did you have any trouble with the MPAA after your final cut?
There's always trouble with the There's always trouble with the MPAA. I think every movie I did in the 90s, we had trouble with the MPAA.
Right.
I became rather adept at working with them. You know, I'd call them up. And another thing that I don't think we did much in Tales from the Hood, but certainly in Menace and 11 to 45 and some of the other movies I did in the 90s, would purposely shoot a gorier take, a bloodier take, a worse thing that I knew I wanted to cut. And we put it in when we sent to the MPAA, because then when I did a negotiation with them, I'd say, this is killing me. But this really bloody shot right here, you know, I guess we could take that out if you'll give us the R at that point. And they're like, oh, let me talk to the guys about it. Okay. And I'm like, I was scared that one day they would come along and say, no, you can keep that, because I never wanted those things. You know, we didn't work that hard on them. They were just there as a loss leader, so to speak. So yeah, there's always was trouble with the MPA. The first movie I directed, this thing called Caught Up, crazy film noir crime movie, but I had shot some things purposely too bloody that I wanted to take out. And then when I talked to them, I was a producer on the film. They didn't realize I was the director, that they were negotiating directly with the director. And I didn't want them to know that, because I was playing good cop, bad cop, and I was the good cop as the producer. And let me go to the director and see if I can get him to do that. And they just didn't realize that I was the director. They would get a lot through that. But it's always a challenge. I think less so now. Stuff has come out with R ratings that in the 90s, I think would have been X's for sure, just for violence and for the bloodiness and everything. Time marches on. I've never been a real huge gore guy personally. I like the violence to be effective, but not just gore for gore's sake. Never was really into that. Now, some people will probably look at things I've done and say, well, that was pretty bloody. What, wasn't that gore for gore's sake? But I would argue, like all the violence and menace to society, I think it was all important. It was, it needed to be there. We were being the I guess the hardcore or the most honest version of Boys from the Hood. But if Boys from the Hood hadn't come first, we'd have never gotten Menace to Society. That one was the one that kind of opened the doorway, and then we're like, okay, we got the real deal here.
Yeah, that car, I just have to say, like on a side note, the car scene with the house being sprayed with the bullets, so that scene just still sticks. Like no matter what, like the way it was shot, it's brutal. Like it's still like if you think anything from that movie, it just sticks in. So yeah.
Crawling trying to save the little kid on the
like every time. Yeah, on the tricycle, gets you every time.
No, that was powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. I was very proud to have done that film.
Ryan?
Oh, well, let's talk about like, okay, you said we have a little bit of time in between here. Time moves on.
It does?
I wasn't thinking 20 years though, before you get to before you go to the next sequel of this film. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, why did it take so long? Uh-oh, you're rubbing your head. That's not good.
In 2000, we had a deal with Focus Features to do an $8 million. They're going to up our budget and $8 million because they saw the numbers that Tales had done on home video. It barely broke even, or maybe they even lost a little bit of money on the theatrical release, but on video and DVD, it went crazy. So we had a deal to do that in the year 2000, and then, as so often happens, the head of the studio got fired. Somebody else came in and said, "Oh no, we're just doing art movies. So we're not interested in doing a Tales sequel." And for the next, I guess 17 years, 17 or 18 years before we got to do another one, we had been trying to get the rights from Universal, because Universal, number one, did not want to do a sequel after that, and two, would not sell the rights to anybody. And the studios are like this these days. They would rather sit on a piece of material than have somebody else make a success out of it and make them look bad. So they just, we were stymied for almost 2 decades. And then finally we were able to talk Universal. They had a division called 1440, which just recently closed down in April, actually. That did their straight to video sequels. They do Scorpion King 2. Another Chucky movie, and we didn't get the resources that we really needed to do it, to match it up to match up with what we had done in the 90s. But we had fun doing the next 2. And number 3, we feel better about them too, because it had better production value. Because we went up to Winnipeg, Canada, coldest city in North America. one of the most, like from Winnipeg around, one of the most boring cities in North America too. So you didn't get distracted from the job. You were working hard on it. But really, what we want to do is a TV series. You know, we kind of like to think that we were Black Mirror before Black Mirror. We were the real Black Mirror because we were talking about people, not the Black Mirror. Love that show, by the way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Got one episode to go on this latest season.
Don't
That's been
spoil it
cool.
for me. I haven't started yet.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to start it, but
There's some
I've heard
intense,
very good things.
it's really good. That's it. It's a good season. Good season. I love that show, and that show's helped revive the horror anthology. It's kind of gone up and down. Right now, it's down because the streaming channels did some horror anthologies that didn't work. But we'll never give up on trying to do it as a TV series because I think
Is there any movement on that?
there was. We had a deal actually with Universal and the executive. I don't know why this keeps happening, but the executive who was pushing it left, and then new person came in and said, "We don't want to do it. We will pay you off your development fee on the script.
Jeez.
We're not going to
No.
do it." So we just took the money. But now Universal doesn't have the TV rights anymore.
Mm.
Spike has them. So if we can sell it to one of the streamers or something, we could do it now. So we've written a bunch of them,
Oh wow.
and hoping someday to get them going.
Yeah, I mean,
There's still social
Netflix-
problems to talk about. Let me tell you.
Yes, definitely. Netflix they seem to do really well with their Cabinet of Curiosity series. So hopefully
Yeah,
that
yeah.
gets some movement.
If we get Guillermo to back us, we definitely could get it done.
Yes, or you should do an episode of that. Actually, I know that he's making Frankenstein next, so he's
Yeah,
gonna
that
be
should
busy.
be awesome.
Yes.
I'm expecting the best version since the Wales version.
Wales, yeah. All right, what are you working on next?
I'm just writing a bunch of things, and the next thing that they give me the money for, but we're on strike.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's just writing right now. Can't take anything out.
Yeah, hopefully that gets resolved soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely have a couple of horror projects I'm working on,
Mm,
crime things.
oops.
Hopefully get something going as soon as we're allowed to again. I guess
Excellent.
we're gonna find out. Are we finding out tomorrow or tonight whether or not the SAG goes on strike? I know it's either tomorrow or today. Probably tomorrow at midnight, I think is the deadline. So
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's close. I know it's close. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know it's close, but all right. Well, we have a couple fun questions for you before we wrap up.
sure.
In the very first episode of the Tales from the Crypt TV show,
Mhm.
William Sadler walks into a diner and orders a cheese sandwich. Doesn't specify what kind of cheese. If you were to walk into a diner and get a cheese sandwich, what kind of cheese would you want? You can grill
Grilled
it. You can make it a
Grilled
burger,
cheddar.
grilled cheddar, like a medium, a sharp, a smoked.
Medium.
Medium. All right, that's good. Like some tomato soup to dip it in, or are you a purist?
That'd be cool.
That'd be cool.
I've had that. Fine with the tomato soup. Yeah. I like cheddar cheese, and grilled cheese sounds good.
Nice.
Maybe
I'm getting really hungry right now.
too.
Yeah, that really hits the spot.
Yeah. Yep.
I got through college on cheddar cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, canned tomato soup.
Oh yeah.
All right, and then a tradition here on Dads from the Crypt is we like to give dad advice. or mentor advice. So what advice would you like to give our audience? It can be fun, it can be serious, it can be silly.
I would just give the audience that if they're filmmakers,
Mhm.
if they're aspiring filmmakers, just to shoot things. Shoot things, because back when we started, my first movie, we used an old Mitchell camera. It was the same kind of camera Hitchcock had used. The thing was huge, heavy, monstrous. You had to have a dolly to put it on. And we're shooting film, which was expensive, and had to buy short ends, etc. Now people can make movies on their phones.
Mm-hmm.
No excuse if you're a young aspiring filmmaker not to just be shooting.
Yeah.
Shoot little shorts, and you can name a lot of guys who started out just doing little shorts or movies on video. Mike Flanagan, who's blown up. You see his first movie. A lot of it takes place in a little tunnel, and all. It's just a spooky thing, but shot very low budget. But people saw the talent in it, and he got a chance. And you have to show off your talent now, and it's got to be shown in a way that can go out to the public and people can see it and get excited about it. It's really hard to walk into a studio or production company now as a first-time director and just talk them into doing something. It can happen if you have a brilliant script. That's the other thing I would say. Write. Be a writer. If you can write, be a writer if you want to be a filmmaker, because that's really where you get your breaks, is that piece of material you have. If people get excited about it, then they'll back you. That's the advice I'd give.
That's awesome.
It's harder now.
Yeah.
And easier.
It's harder. Yeah. It's a different challenge.
Yeah. Harder to get it distributed, harder to get people to see it, harder to sell it, but easier to actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the guy who did, I can't remember his name right now, but he did the reboot of Evil Dead, not the latest one, the one before that.
Oh, Fede.
Yes.
Because he did that short with like the invasion order. Yeah.
Robots attacking the city.
Yeah, that's great.
And it was on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That's how he got his break.
So yeah, that's the thing. There's just so many avenues now. It's overwhelming, but it's easier to put your stuff out there.
Yeah.
Well, Darin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We all really appreciate it. Where can people find you? Do you have any socials? Do you have any
I'm on Facebook. Hit me up on Facebook. Send me a friend request. I'll probably say yes. Unless I go to your page and find out you're a Trumpster, then you're not getting on. I'm sorry. Nobody should be surprised that a creator of Tales from the Hood will have that attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't see that, I'll probably accept you if you're into horror.
I'm glad I passed the test. When I messaged you.
I gotta try. I haven't started the test yet, so I'm gonna try and I'm gonna send it to you.
There you go. Now you're gonna start getting Facebook requests.
Yeah, you gotta get a whole bunch of like Facebook requests, like
probably be from some people who want to say, "Fuck you."
Well, that's the nature of it.
Their red hat on,
All right. Well, that wraps things up. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Great to meet you both.
On behalf,
On
behalf of Dads from the Crypt and the Black Girl Nerds podcast, we thank you for listening and have a good night.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.